Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Make Your Mark, a podcast from Hitmarker, where in each episode I speak to, I will say, experts, just to kind of put them on the spot a bit, in different areas of gaming and esports. And today I'm joined by Nick Williams, who is the Managing Director of DotX Talent. We've already had a wonderful person from DotX on the show, so I had to get someone back for a sequel. It was that good. So, Nick, mate, thank you very much for joining me, mate. I appreciate you taking the time.
You're very welcome, Adam.
I think this is the third time scheduling it. Things got in the way, but we're finally here to chat.
Yeah, sorry. It's been a bit of a rocky 2 weeks. Finally succumbed to COVID. All went a bit wrong, but I'm glad we're finally able to sit down.
There we go. It happens. But so obviously you've got a background in sports law, which I know nothing about, so I can't harp on about that too much anyway. But why have you decided to go all in at this point? It seems like on the kind of content creator and esports space with DotX.
Sure. I mean, for Morgan Sports Law, which I guess is the place to start as a business move, it's kind of a logical progression of what it already does for athletes. Now, talent management is kind of obviously a very different beast to a law firm. MSL did actually think about launching an esports specific subsidiary, but to be honest, the financials of it at the moment where esports is an industry just really didn't work, particularly given our focus on the individual rather than, doing something like, ESG law, acting for primarily orgs, businesses of that kind. So DotX was kind of a way to bring some of MSL services and expertise to a market that was, very much adjacent to what it did for professional athletes. And then combine it with the expertise of people like Mitsuko and Jay to offer something that we think is kind of genuinely different from anything else that's out there. I guess for me personally, it's the same story you hear from everyone. I've always loved playing games, including against other people online, Age of Empires 2 on a 56k modem, StarCraft, CS, that kind of stuff. And I've dipped in and out of watching esports for, I guess probably the last 10 years. And ultimately, I guess a contract is a contract. A lot of the expertise I have from my career generally in sports specifically kind of transfers across pretty easily to this space. So, I think, finding ways to integrate things that you enjoy into a career you already have is a pretty smart move if you can do it.
That makes sense. And they always say, if you can monetize an interest or a passion, then effectively you'll never work a day in your life. I'm here to say I don't believe in that personally, but also I'm in a very stressful part of the industry, I would say, where you just kind of hear about all of the bad stuff all the time and don't really focus on the good stuff. So thankfully that's kind of unique to us, though I imagine unlike the law side, you run up against some stuff as well.
I don't know, you say that, Adam, but I mean, it's less the case with DotX, but as a lawyer, particularly a disputes lawyer, people tend to come to you when they're having a bad time or they've got a problem.
Yeah.
It's very much on the stressful end of whatever's going on in their life at a particular time.
Yeah.
DotX is kind of nice because I get to deal with people, when good stuff is happening as well. You get the highs as well as the lows of what's going on in their career and their life. So, I think, making your entire career about the thing you love can be a kind of slightly dangerous thing to do. But I think if you can make it fit anyway, then it can work.
Yeah, I think setting boundaries is a big part of that. Because when I was first freelance writing and stuff, I would work an admittedly stupid amount of hours, let's say 14, 16 hours a day or something. And then I'd okay, I need to rest. I'm going to watch some esports or I'm going to play Call of Duty or something. And you're not actually really removing yourself, or I wasn't actually removing myself from what I was thinking of and working in all of the time, and also I was still sat at a desk where I'd been working all day. It's just the same environment. So I think, boundary setting is a big part of that and keeping it alive in that sense. Now, I've got a super serious question to ask here. And what's your favorite esport at the moment?
To be honest, the only one I watch at the moment is League.
Okay.
And I've been pretty sporadic on watching it during summer split, but I watch Worlds. Normally during the summer, I find I have much less free time. So that naturally means that I spend less time doing things I find fun. But,
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, at least you've got Worlds to look forward to coming up right anyway. So Who's winning?
Oof. I couldn't call that, Adam. I really couldn't.
I'm willing to put a bet on with you. We could put 10 fresh Great British pounds on it. Actually, no, I don't follow League of Legends like that anyway. I kind of know who's in, but I
What's your
couldn't tell
game?
you what a gank is or how people can translate a CS lead into winning on the Rift or anything like that. My knowledge is very rudimentary. So, yeah, and I don't actually watch anything at the moment. I tried watching some of the Valorant champions,
Mm-hmm.
and I find like League of Legends, I think is a quite a big barrier to entry if you want to understand like the in-depth parts of the game and the nuances of it.
Mm.
Which I've never been a PC gamer. I'm an absolute console noob like that. So, uh, I can't quite get into it. But one thing I've noticed with DotX very quickly, you've built like a solid roster of people that you represent and manage, right? But why did you think there was a need for DotX? Was there something that wasn't being fulfilled by the kind of companies and agencies already in the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think like most new industries, you've got a lot of people springing up into the space who don't necessarily have a lot of expertise. And I think that sometimes that's not a problem. Sometimes it's not a problem that you're not a lawyer or that you don't have, I don't know, a detailed background in marketing or anything like that. But I think there's always a space for people who are expert in things like that to provide good services to people. I mean, we looked at what was out there when we were thinking about doing this, and there didn't seem to really be, any agency who was. I mean, people like to talk about the word sort of holistic or 360 and stuff like that, but when you actually drill down into what they were doing, none of it really seemed to do that or be that. There's a lot of bad stuff that happens, to be honest, in any entertainment or sports industry. It's not like esports, which is the only one that has problems with conflicts of interest and players getting done over and things like that. That's as true in sport. But it certainly happens a lot in esports, and a lot of the reason for that is because on both sides of the equation, there aren't, professional people getting involved in things. There's a lot of passion, a lot of people wanting to do stuff, but not a lot of, expert support that sits behind that all the time. So, yeah, we naturally do have quite a lot of expertise, at least in representing professional athletes. We thought that was something that would really be valuable to, players, but also content creators, casters, people who sit within that broader ecosystem. So we put together a business around both doing that and doing some other stuff which we thought was exciting. A lot of the kind of brand development stuff. We do a lot of stuff around social media analytics with our clients. So that's why we thought it would be a good offering.
And there's a service you announced a few months ago now. I don't know. It's probably actually further away than how it feels to me. Where I can't remember the exact name. Was it like player contract service, something along those
Player
lines?
transfer
But
service. It's not the sexiest name, is it?
I should have had that though. It's better than what I said. But that's priced decently, and I think like in the press material for it, it was like a one-off thing, no commitment, but like we want to help you guys. Like this is an affordable price point for most people to avoid a lot of the problems you've stated, the conflict of interest and stuff. Was that something you had in mind from the beginning? Because that is something that definitely sets you guys apart, and obviously having the law stuff as well as all of the talent and partnership expertise is definitely a unique selling point for you guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's something different to what other people do. It's something that you're starting to see happen in sport to a certain extent. So
Right.
a player, rather than have an agent do their transfer, they might get a law firm to do that transfer. I mean, there's a few reasons that you might want that, but the main one is it avoids some of the significant conflicts of interest that can exist in the agency space. Again, it's not an esports specific issue. It's something that happens in sport as well. But the fundamental principle is rather than just offering a kind of long-term representation option, which for some people does absolutely make sense. Some people want the partnerships, the brand building stuff. But for some players, all of that stuff is kind of secondary, and actually, really, what they need is someone to be there and support them when they sign with a team or change teams. So the player transfer service is kind of a standalone, discrete thing which we offer, rather than having to sign into a long-term representation deal or a year or more. It's just us acting in relation to a particular transfer or signing, and the result of that is it ends up being cheaper for the player. It's at a, as you say, hopefully much more affordable price point. So pretty much, any player who's pursuing a professional esports career should be able to make use of it.
Mm-hmm. And there's a prevailing narrative as well. Sorry, but like where now senior people in the industry are encouraging players to always approach lawyers and make use of lawyers when it comes to these contract signings and stuff. So that seems like at least a decent trend that we're seeing in the right direction now, instead of the kind of predatory stuff that was, I guess, more persistent and prevalent in the earlier years of the industry.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think the direction of travel is in general good, particularly at the higher end. I think one of the problems that then creates for a player is, well, who do I get? Which law firm knows how to do a player transfer? I mean, there's a lot of law firms who try and do stuff in esports. And there's a range of different levels of expertise that sit behind that. So it's very difficult to know who to go to, what's a good price for that, because as with anything else, it can be a bit opaque about what that will cost you. One of the advantages of what we do is you basically know you're going to get someone who knows what they're doing, and it's also priced in a way that, rather than having to, lawyers are expensive, and I say that as a lawyer. If you're paying an hourly rate to a solicitor to do your transfer contract or whatever it is, that's going to rack up a lot of fees very quickly. We work in a slightly different way. Again, it's more on a commission basis than it is on a an amount that's equivalent to a commission basis. So it's always going to be affordable for that player to use us for their transfer, whereas it might not necessarily be affordable to use a law firm unless you're, one of the higher earning players out there.
That makes sense. Right, we're going to shift a bit. So I have to have a little tiny monologue here just to set the scene a bit before I ask this question.
I love an Adam Fitch monologue.
You're one of the only people, mate. But a running theory of mine is that esports for most purposes doesn't really exist. It is just an umbrella term for a bunch of sub communities and scenes, like League of Legends fan base very different from Call of Duty fan base. And you need to understand that. And effectively, esports is entirely fragmented, just like sports is. Like trying to band all of the sports together and making any, I guess, like sweeping statements is probably not going to be too accurate. And I think the same is there for competitive gaming. In sports, there are a lot of like governing bodies. In esports, I guess the equivalent of governing bodies are typically the publishers of the games, which creates quite an interesting dynamic, and it's definitely different than sports because like nobody owns football. For example, I can go have a five-a-side tournament this weekend. We don't need to get permission from whoever. Like maybe a rough, example there. But if I want to run a Call of Duty event in the UK, I not only need to typically get approval from Activision Blizzard, but also London Royal Ravens, which is a franchise in the COD League, because they basically own that territory. That's part of their rights now. So it's a lot going on there, and it is different from sports in that sense. Matches are played on somebody else's or a company's IP, and does that cause any like unique legal issues for esports? I know what you've said a lot of the time so far in this episode is that not all of the problems are unique to esports in any way. Like there's similar stuff going on in other competitive sports, but like is the fact that games are played on someone else's IP, ruled by the people that own the IP, does that create any unique problems or I guess scenarios for esports? That was a very long rambling.
That's a very long question, Adam. I'll do my best to answer it.
So, there's my monologue.
You're right. In terms of governance, you can't really compare esports to sport. At least not sort of European model of sports governance, where for each sport you have an international federation that sort of sits at the top and regulates the sport, and then national federations which individual players have to be a member of in order to compete. Like, none of that exists, at least properly, in esports. It's a total mishmash of, you know, various tournament rules, franchise rules, a bit of voluntary regulation, and a lot of whatever goes. I guess one of the main knock-on effects of that, which we see a lot, and one of the sort of main differentiators between sports and esports, is when it comes to a contract. Sports contracts tend to sit within a quite complicated, very well-established regulatory structure. So when you're drafting a football contract, you've got to be thinking about, the regulations of the particular national association, the rules of the league, and then FIFA's rules on, the status and transfer of players. And all of those feed into what the contract looks like, how it works, the extent to which its terms are enforceable. For example, when you're looking at a Premier League contract, the fundamental terms of that contract are always the same. At least, the key bit, obviously, there's lots of stuff that sits in the schedule around, the transfer and provisions and all of that kind of stuff. But fundamentally, the Premier League prescribes that your contract must look like a certain way.
Right.
So in esports, if you'll excuse the pun, it's a completely different ball game. Sometimes there are franchise leagues that restrict how contracts can look, start and end dates, occasionally limitations on the kind of language that you can use. But there isn't sort of collectively negotiated standard forms ever. And a lot of the issues that creates is particularly kind of exacerbated at the lower end, when you have a lot of small orgs writing their own contracts, or something always I find astonishing is getting law students to write them. And I think that's a real value add of DotX, because it means that for an individual player, it doesn't matter how big or small you are, you've got someone who can bring that expertise to the table, at least on your behalf, and hopefully improve the transaction overall.
Right, I've got another lofty question. Do you think...
I'm not sure I answered your question, actually, Adam.
No, I'm happy with it. I mean, it was a long ramble, and there were many strings to pull from it. So I think you did an exemplary job, mate. But what I want to ask is, do you think the esports industry would benefit from having these associations and, I guess, ruling governing bodies, instead of it being so fragmented? And I'm not necessarily saying all terms and standards have to be across every single game. I mean, there's new games that come out all the time, and some publishers aren't going to want to play ball with others, and they also don't necessarily need to abide by these rules. But if you look at Counter-Strike, for example, Valve doesn't really have too much to do with it besides the majors. We've got ESL and Blast, and WePlay jumps in, PGL jumps in. It's incredibly all over the place, and teams are buying into these different leagues as partners. Some can't even get in. There's just so many different things going on. Would it help if there was one residing body over, say, that game? Just to finish out the example.
I mean, it kind of depends how it was done, and certainly there's big problems in sports governance as well. That's not a perfect solution. I think it's always valuable for people to have predictability, and it's always valuable for a player in particular to have some structure that they can refer to if there's a problem. I suppose a micro example is the disputes in sport. You always know roughly how a disciplinary dispute is going to pan out. You know where it's going to end up. Who's going to be deciding it, where the ultimate appeal is going to be. In esports, you have none of that. And when you've got a UK player contracting to a US org and agreeing to litigate in Delaware or wherever it is, that's not an aimed example. It's really kind of difficult for that person. And it creates quite a difficult power dynamic, I think. So, yeah, having standardization is always helpful. Would the best solution be one governing body which sits above it all? Maybe, maybe not. Sort of depends how they do it and how well they do it. Something I think esports would benefit from more. Again, it needs to be done properly, and I know there's been some attempts at doing it with mixed degrees of success and acceptance. Is better players associations or unions. It's something that was kind of instrumental in the shaping of how professional sport looks today. Is still incredibly important. I mean, at MSL, we've recently helped set up a players' union for women's professional rugby. That does some really great work. If you have good people running it who know what they're doing and do it in the right way, it can be very, very valuable for everyone, not just the players.
Well, we've seen what's happened with like the CSPPA, the Players Association in CS:GO. It's not gone too well. But again, like the people, as you say, you need good people attached to it who know what they're on about. And I think a lot of the players have a say in what goes on there, which I don't know. It's obviously important that they have a voice because it's representing them, but also, I don't know. I also think there's a lot of smart people out there with experience in these kind of things. Is all I will say on that front. But are there any kind of commonplace things in esports contracts that you've seen at the moment which you think we could do away with or do with improving and updating? As you say, if there's law students writing them up, you know what I mean, there's probably room for improvement.
So I mean, I guess the thing is there's no such thing as a standard esports contract. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. Generally speaking, I find that the ones from the bigger orgs, as you would expect, are better. There is still a tendency for them to want to introduce incredibly one-sided provisions, particularly around termination. Into those contracts, termination for convenience at little or no notice, which basically does away with the entire point of the contract to a certain extent, because then the player has no certainty that they will still be with that org in 12 months' time or whatever it is. I mean, that's definitely a problem. I think there is a tendency for esports contracts to be either way oversimplistic or tortuously complex and filled with extremely onerous obligations. But again, there are common problems that exist, but each one has its own problems and its own positive aspects as well.
One thing that I find I find it particularly worrying where I think like FaZe kind of been accused of this. I will use the word accused of like managing players and effectively serving as like a talent agency and management company, as well as like basically employing the players for their services. And it's being stamped down on as far as I'm aware, and even like TSM set up their own quote unquote independent agency in Icon to represent their players and get them brand deals and stuff, which you'll no doubt will benefit TSM, but in a way where there's no conflict of interest because it's not TSM doing it. Do you find that to be worrying as well? Because that's one of the big things I hope changes. There's obviously a very clear conflict of interest if you're managing a talent as well as like literally using them in your pro teams and stuff, right? There's so many opportunities for mishandling. Is the way
I think it's a huge problem. I mean, it's an own interest conflict, right? So when your interest is an agent conflict with that of your client, and one thing that happens, as you say, which is particularly egregious, is teams normally via some kind of corporate structure, which makes it sound slightly more palatable, owning agencies that represent players who play for those teams. But you even have, player agencies openly advertising that they do consultancy services for teams. And to me, as a lawyer, that is totally crazy. Like, as an agent, you are a fiduciary duty to your client. It's a relationship where a client should be able to put absolute trust and confidence in their agent's loyalty, such that they know that that agent will put aside their personal interests and act solely in their interests. I mean, how you can possibly say that an agency, which is owned by a team, would solely act for the interests of a player when dealing with that team is just nuts. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, you can kind of dress it up in fancy language and say, oh, look, we've separated into different corporate entities, but if the ultimate beneficial ownership is still the same, if you've got crossover in employees, it like, it's just bullshit. Sorry, I probably can't say that on your podcast, but it's
rubbish. You can.
I don't buy it at all. And I think that is a very serious problem. I mean, it's one of several kinds of conflict problem that exist in the agency space. The other one is kind of what the player transfer service is aimed at. I mean, I'd say DotX, by its very nature, because we're linked to a law firm, because we actually have proper conflict checks, that kind of deals with the own interest conflict thing, because we're pretty serious about that. The second type is sort of inter-client conflicts, and that's when the interests of one or more of your clients conflict with one another. And I mean, let's say, for example, you run an agency which represents a very large number of top tier CS talent in a particular region, and esports is small enough that actually it doesn't take nearly as many players to do that as it would do in mainstream sports. Now, you have that duty, again, that fiduciary duty to act solely in the interests of each of those particular clients. But in that situation, it's just incredibly likely that you're going to have players who are either competing for the same spot on the same team, or even if it's not exactly the same spot, you're having players competing for the same slice of a limited budget. So, I mean, I think it's a problem. I think it happens a lot, and it's one of the things that we're trying to address with our player transfer service.
How is there any way in which it can be fixed? Where I say fixed, I'm not expecting you to come in and just like change the industry,
single-handedly fix it.
It'd be nice if you could, but like, is there any way we can what can be done to change that to ensure those conflicts aren't present? I mean, I don't see any way in which it's going to get done.
I mean, I think having competition naturally solves that to a certain extent, because as you have more players, I mean, when I say competition, I mean more agencies in the space.
Yes.
Naturally, doing things properly does solve it. So if you genuinely put in place conflict checks, and when you have a conflict, you do not take on a new client, that again, is a solution to the problem, but it does rely on people being willing to do that and, turn those clients down, which is never going to be in your, business interests. We actually have done it twice in our very short existence, because it's the right thing to do. I mean, I know that sounds a bit corny, but like we genuinely believe in that. So you need to have people come in who are willing to, operate their businesses in that way. And then I think you just need to have, good competition in the market. Lots of people who know what they're doing, hopefully.
Because like in CS, I can guarantee there will be some conflicts because, as you say, there's one agency in particular that runs much of that, and that's becoming the same in Valorant, which is now entering a huge roster. Like it's the off season, like the top partner teams have just been announced. Everyone's leaving, every team, all of Optic are gone, and so on and so forth. Everyone's trying to stack up and get the best roster they can, and I think there are probably less than a handful of agencies that are representing most of those players, and you can just foresee a lot of the
potential things
issues
they can do to help manage those conflicts internally, but
you've got to rely on them to do that.
Having agents who truly operate independent to one another and making sure there's no crossover, but I agree with you. I don't think it's ideal.
Tough.
It is tough, and I don't think. And then
I think in like Overwatch League there were instances where like lawyers would be working with teams as well as like representing players, or like working with players as clients who are potentially joining those teams. I think there's a few egregious examples there. Like I heard many moons ago, to the point where my memory's a bit shaky on it now. But I just think, like, if there's a big game there that emerges out of nowhere, a Valorant or an Overwatch, or it's getting big investment like the Overwatch League, there are people who see the amount of investment going in, and unfortunately, not everybody is perfect and goodwill. There are going to be some bad actors in that space who eyes light up with opportunity, which, esports isn't all bad. I don't want to make it out that way at all. I know I often do. I think overwhelmingly it's positive that the people in the industry, I think there's a few bad actors. Not everyone's, especially in like the agency space and representing and managing players. I don't think everyone's evil by any means, but I just think it takes a couple or even one to kind of ruin the reputation for a lot of others if some serious conflicts come out, right?
And I mean, to be honest, I don't think esports is necessarily worse than sport.
Mm-hmm.
I think, well, how do I put it? It's different. To be honest, it's a little bit more brazen, and that I find. I mean, there's a lot of problems in sport. There's a major sports agency who, a few months ago got fined €2.5 million by a Dutch court because it had acted for the team and the player in the same transaction and not told the player about that. It's just, it seems to happen in broader daylight in esports, and no one seems to have a problem with it. And I always find it like slightly disappointing, actually, that it's not like there's such an opportunity to do this better, and it just doesn't get taken. But yeah, no, look, I agree with you. I don't think esports is worse really than anything else. I think it's just maybe a little bit more front and center.
It's like a terminally online industry. What I mean? Everything goes down on Twitter, at least in the West. Like, news travels pretty quick, and everything. I don't know. There's not many secrets that stay secrets, which I guess people are a bit more switched on than that in some sports, and they know not to run around and tell everyone about all the bad shit they're doing. And also, there's not too many people who are willing to say anything and expose anyone in esports, and understandably so, because a lot of people don't want to burn bridges and have nowhere to work in the future or no good relationships and stuff, right? So it takes, I think, generally people who are independent or just have giant cojones to be willing to speak out on everything, which is why it's so rare, and thus everyone just acts. I think that the silence makes it seem like everyone is okay with all of this shit going on, which I don't think is the case, but they'd rather be quiet than potentially, like ruin some relationships and burn some bridges. And that's me speaking as someone who has burnt many bloody bridges at this point, to the point where if anything was to happen between me and Hitmarker, there's probably not many places I can go at this point. I would be looking elsewhere. I might have to go join sport or something like that, so I can speak from experience there.
How do you feel about a talent agency, Adam?
Oh God, no! I couldn't do it, mate. I'm working with, like, handling people and being nice to them and stuff. I don't know if that's my forte,
Mine either. That's why I haven't at Seiko.
That makes sense. No, but so with esports being what many people say, especially on LinkedIn, an ever-evolving, rapidly growing industry where things change every day, it's so dynamic. What kind of things do we need to be aware of moving forward that may be issues? I know there are mobile games, which if you look in the East, especially, like what I believe is probably the most watched esport out there is Mobile Legends Bang Bang, which I think is Moonton, which is getting sued by Riot Games every bloody week. Mm-hmm. And nothing seems to change. They're still racking up millions of peak viewers and stuff, right? But then there was the whole thing around PUBG Mobile and all the games in India, I'm pretty sure, right? I think it was probably last year in 2020 where there are a lot of games being banned for violence and stuff. I think China's probably up there as well with stuff, right? So I guess the fact it's a newer industry, a young industry where new games can come in at any time and new developments means that you need to stay on your toes especially as like a lawyer, to understand everything that's going on and navigate the space.
Yeah, sure. I mean, lawyers tend to be specialized, so they tend to be very
Right.
focused on looking at what's going on in their particular, what's going on in their back garden, because you can't keep on
Right.
top of all the legal developments everywhere around the world and,
Mm-hmm.
eat and sleep and do your job and all of that kind of stuff.
Got
I
you.
mean, in the UK recently, everyone was looking at what the government would do with loot boxes, because that's
Yes.
something that could have a very big impact on particularly mobile gaming, I guess. I mean, after a lot of prevarication, the end result of that was basically a lot of, hand wringing and saying we need to worry about the children, but not any actual regulation. They just sort of punted that problem back to the games industry with overtones that unless it does something about it, they're going to regulate them in the future. Um,
Right.
I guess within talent agency, E6 long promised talent agent regulations, something I'm keeping an eye on. I mean, as you all know,
Okay.
ESIC is a voluntary regulator anyway. So in order for anyone to be bound by those, they would need to voluntarily sign up to them. I actually do think ESIC has its heart in the right place. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
got some good people involved with it. I think it would probably be a good thing, but I'm not convinced anyone is going to be that bothered if their agents aren't signed up to those regulations. I guess we'll see. I mean, how many agencies actually do sign up will probably depend on what they contain, and I think E6 got a difficult job in that respect, because make them too tough, make the consequences too severe, and no one's going to sign up to them in fear that they might actually breach them and then get kicked out, and that would look really bad. And equally, make them too wishy-washy, don't put meaningful stuff in them, and people aren't going to see the point.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to prejudge, but from what I hear about them so far, it will be some pretty basic standards, things like having proper professional indemnity insurance and standards of conduct, which most people should meet. I mean, I think if everyone does sign up to them, it would help weed out a few bad actors, but I guess it remains to be seen how impactful they actually are in practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think like E6. I don't know. I agree. I think Ian Smith and Stephen Hanna and stuff like. I think they're good folk. Spoken to them a lot over the years. But the whole handling of what's gone on in CS:GO, and what we're even outstanding on some things, waiting for some answers and stuff with all the bans and how that's been handled. I don't know. I think it shows they're severely understaffed and undersupported.
That's
That's one
100%
thing.
true. But
And then
I,
branching out into something else as well, like as well as everything they've got on. That yeah, that's not an easy job, is it? I don't know how
they've got a
anyone
lot on
can
their
sleep.
plate, and they don't.
Yeah.
Again, this kind of comes back to the structural issue of governance, right? So in mainstream sport, um, bodies like this is doping, but WADA get a huge amount of funding from various sources. It's ESIC. I guess it probably gets. I don't really know how it gets its funding. I think it gets it from its membership, right? But I don't think it gets a huge amount, and it's got a very complex job on its hands. And when something huge gets thrown its way, I think it probably entirely understandably can take a long time to deal with it. I think Ian Smith, as you say, he's a guy who's got a lot of expertise. He's got a lot of background in regulation and sport. I think he used to work for do stuff in cricket,
Cricket,
so
yeah.
he definitely knows what he's doing, and he's very good at it. But yeah, I think it is a hard job for them.
He just likes a boring sport, unfortunately. I mean, who likes cricket? No, I'm joking. I'm joking. Right. Another area which, as you say, like um, lawyers typically specialize and are specialists in certain areas, and I don't believe this is your area of expertise or
You're
specialism,
going to
but
ask me anyway.
we're going to ask anyway because I've got you here. Why not? As developments quite frequently, from what I can tell, in LA regarding like independent contractors and the use of those. Pretty sure Activision Blizzard are effectively being forced into hiring like 1,000 of their QA testers who were contractors as full-time employees, and that seems like a positive development for me because there's a lot a lot that can go wrong or be abused when it comes to the contracts over there, and esports is not is certainly a part of that, I should say. Right. how do I ask this? Is it a real severe problem in the industry? And do you see, I guess, like the crackdown on the independent contractors as a positive thing that we should be supporting?
I mean, it's a problem in all sorts of industries.
Again, yes.
Whether or not someone is a contractor or someone is an employee. As you said, I'm not a Californian lawyer. I don't know anything very much about American law, but whether someone is under a contract of service, an employment contract, rather than a contract for services, is something that has been an issue in labour law for as long as we've had labour laws. In the UK, it's enshrined within the statutory definition in Section 230 of the Employment Rights Act. And then there's a huge amount of case law that has arisen here around that definition, when you can categorise someone as an employee rather than anything else, or worker. Independent contractors very frequently, or contracts, very frequently gets challenged for not being reflective of the true nature of the relationship. And despite the best efforts of successive Conservative governments in this country, we still have reasonably good protections for workers over here. And when the label that gets put on a relationship doesn't reflect the reality of it, British courts will kind of step in and rewrite that contract effectively, which isn't something that courts will generally do for any other kind of contract. Now, the definition is important for a lot of reasons, but I mean, it will vary jurisdiction to jurisdiction. But basically, as an employee, you have a lot of protections and employment rights which you don't have as a contractor. So a unscrupulous business will do its best to not give you those protections and not give you those nice things like, holiday pay, protection from certain whistleblowing detriments, all that kind of stuff. All that stuff costs businesses money and it's inconvenient. So they will try and avoid it wherever possible. It happens in esports. It happens, in the construction industry. It happens everywhere. So it's definitely a problem that it happens. It's basic workers' rights issue, but I think it's good when we do things to limit it happening.
That makes sense, and we shall move into the career advice portion, the latter portion of this episode. Thank you very much for taking all of my vastly weird and I guess sporadic questions. I appreciate it, mate. And I know it's not easy to parse where the actual question is out of my rambles sometimes, so I appreciate your patience there. But so if people want to work in esports as a lawyer or something along those lines, what is the best course of action? Because look, thankfully there's no esports law certification out there that I'm aware of. People are coming in and trying to create esports certifications and educational courses and stuff, right? But we're far away from those being appropriate, I would suggest. So it'd be a very obvious question and answer for you, I'm sure. But where do people start if they want to get into law and specialize in esports and gaming?
So in terms of resources, it's pretty difficult at the moment, at least for esports. Someone will probably sell you a book or a course or something that isn't worth the paper it's written on or the time you'd spend going on it. Unlike sport, where there's now a pretty vast body of arbitral decisions of the Court of Arbitration for Sport that you can read if you're interested in that kind of thing. That doesn't really exist in esports. It's frankly, there's not even many, if any, kind of published judicial decisions that you can kind of dissect and get interested in. I think I used to get asked a lot, how do I become a sports lawyer? And now I get asked, how do I get into esports law? And it's always kind of the same answer, which is don't set out to do that thing, or don't try and do that thing from day one. Become the best lawyer that you can be in an area that suits where you maybe eventually want to go. So be a really good contract lawyer, be an employment lawyer, do regulatory IP, get that expertise and then move across. I think in terms of how you get there in the first place, I guess probably the first question I always encourage people to ask themselves is whether they actually really want to be a lawyer, because I think a lot of people watch seats or whatever and think it's all swanning around in glass-fronted offices and driving a Jag. I think it takes a particular kind of person, and it doesn't suit everyone. And when you start out in particular, it definitely eats your life if you want to get anywhere, and you've got to be willing to make that sacrifice. But if you are willing to make that sacrifice and it's what you really want to do, good grades, pretty much essential. If you want to get into a good law firm or top chambers, you have to have a gold-plated CV. So, work hard, stay in school, get top marks, apply for lots of scholarships, do some pro bono. And if you've done all of that, that puts you in a pretty good place to get that kind of initial traineeship and to get that experience somewhere good. Go somewhere good, be that a law firm or chambers, get good experience from people who are really good at their job, from other lawyers who are really specialists in what they do and the best at what they do. Do that for at least 5 years. And then you can sit back and think, do I want to go and do esports or sports still? Is that something I still want to do? If it is, great, you're in a fantastic position to do it. If it's not, you've still got a bright career ahead of you. I think, without getting into the debate about esports degrees and things like that, a lot of people get target fixation too early on with this kind of stuff. The chances to be an esports lawyer from day one are, rarer than hen's teeth. They don't, I think there was Fnatic did a traineeship for someone a couple of years ago, but there's not a lot of that. I think you've got to kind of commit yourself to being the best lawyer you possibly can be, and then look for ways to transition that into this industry.
It's one of the few jobs in the industry where you can't go on Hitmarker, just type in law and then apply for jobs there. It's not going to be that easy for you. It sounds like, I know one thing is that I'm written off from ever being a lawyer. If you say a gold-plated CV and good grades and stuff I was more of a class clown than someone who applied themselves at school. So I'm already out of the running, unfortunately. So that's that. But you're say it takes...
It's fine.
I don't feel like I am either, actually. But, you said it takes a particular kind of person to, I guess, thrive in that kind of environment. What qualities do you think are necessary to survive and thrive there?
I think you've got to have a very thick skin. I think you've got to be quite driven. It's a job particularly when you're starting out, you put in a lot of hours. You talked about 15, 16-hour days. That was my 20s. I did that a lot, and I still do it fairly often, to be honest with you. It's not the most friendly thing for, having extensive interests outside of work. I think you've got to have a little bit of an addictive personality. I think that helps. I think it's not always healthy, but I think it is one of the things that makes me a good lawyer, because I get obsessed with what I do. I get obsessed with making sure I've found out, every possible route that I could pursue in order to argue something or do something, and making sure you have attention to detail when you do stuff. I think those are probably the key ones. Probably a few more if I thought about it. But
now I feel like I might be solid material for it, because I'm an obsessive motherfucker, and I have the toughest skin going. So yeah, I'm now going to start my journey after this to become a lawyer, not an esports lawyer, but just a lawyer, and then maybe esports. Actually, no, esports is not what I want to do in the future. So,
what do you want to do?
Sleep.
Me too.
Yeah, you more so than me. You need it more than me, I assume, mate. Considering, but no, it's been very interesting, Matt. I appreciate you taking the time. As you say, you're a busy guy and you've got a lot going on, so I appreciate you taking a solid 50 minutes ish to record this with me. One more thing. Well, there are a lot more I want to ask, but time doesn't permit. An opportunity for you to shout out whatever you want within reason. And plug whatever you want within reason as well.
Sure. I guess if you want to check out more about DotX, what we do, We appear at a lot of trade shows, things like that. But you can always look at our website, which is www.dotxtalent.com. And yeah, if you're a player, content creator, caster, or brand who wants to work with one of those people, do get in touch.
It's a decent website as well, I will say. It's quite a nice one. I remember when I opened it, I was like, oh, and I never really have that reaction to websites anymore. So I recommend everyone check it out.
It's, I mean, we spent a lot of time on it. I say we, it was our web developers, but yeah, we spent a lot of time working with them to get it right and make sure it, was useful and looked nice.
Well, I mean, I remember Miss Oki, like, she didn't announce her job for ages. I guess it was waiting for DotX to be announced, right? Was it just spending like 8 months on making sure this website was spot on?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't just the website holding that up. I mean, Mitsuko joined us, I think, in October of 21. And then I think we launched end of January, if I'm right. So a lot of that was just us.
It felt a lot longer than that to me.
Kind of putting ourselves in place, working out exactly what we were going to do, how we were going to do it, recruiting the right people, which is hard.
I can only imagine.
Particularly when you're, you're hiring people who maybe haven't had a job before in the industry, and you want to make sure that they've got the right qualities and they're going to be good for it. Getting ourselves in a good place. So when we launched, we weren't winging it. I think that's something we've always seen as super important, that we're not, so many of these agencies start out just someone in someone's bedroom thinking, oh, I could be an agent. How hard can that be? We definitely wanted to make sure we did it properly and that we kind of knew what we were doing from day one. So we took a bit of time to develop it. The website was bubbling away along in the background, but it wasn't just us tweaking with our scroll bars.
No. Well, that's also how most of these esports organizations started as a whole. Anyway, just someone in the bedroom. How hard is it to just have a team that wins world championships? And surprise, it's pretty bloody difficult. But your Twitter will be in the description, as well as a link to DotX Talent's website. So everyone go check them out. Again, thank you very much for taking the time, mate. And for everyone watching at home, thanks for watching. Everyone listening, because we are on all major audio platforms at this point, thank you very much for taking the time. And we will see you on the next episode of Make Your Mark. Cheers.